Welcome to everyone to Gems from the Wisdom Traditions, a conversation circle offered here at Still and Moving Center every Saturday at 3 p.m. Hawaii time, in which we really seek to eke out everyone's wisdom. Everyone who is here participating has their own life wisdom that we're looking forward to hearing from and deepening even more through our mutual sharing. Our topics come from the Still and Moving Center Almanac each week. And this year is the year of being truly human. One of our abilities as human beings is to look to the stars, to look into deep space, and to contemplate deeper matters, such as this theme of ours for today, space, visible, and invisible. We are so fortunate to have with us Daniel Godinez, who was originally born in Mexico, immigrated to the United States, and had the good fortune of being introduced to astronomy as a young teen. And in fact, we're hoping that his teacher, Kim Miller, may be part of today's meeting. He had the opportunity to remotely control a telescope in Australia. Can you imagine doing that as a junior high school student? And so it really ignited in him a passion to research the cosmos and to contribute to the scientific community, which is what this project actually was with the telescope. And so that desire opened for him many academic opportunities, including the privilege of teaching and mentoring many other students in the study of astronomy. He studied physics as an undergraduate, and he's now pursuing his PhD in astronomy at New Mexico State University. He's he's specializing in the application of computational machine learning techniques to help us understand our solar system as well as our overall structure of the universe. No doubt you received a beautiful passage from Einstein when you got your link to come to today's meeting. And I wanted us to start, before I turn it over to Daniel, by just having a chance, and sometimes when David's speaking, he has us do something like this, to just take a meditative moment to turn inward. And I'm going to be reading a quote from Hermes magazine. Close your eyes and let the mind expand. Let no fear of death or darkness arrest its course. Allow the mind to merge with mind. Let it flow out upon the great curve of consciousness. Let it soar on the wings of the great bird of duration up to the very circle of eternity. I will let Daniel take it from here. Daniel?
Thank you, Renee, and thank you, everyone. I wanted to start by sharing this particular research that went on last year, actually conducted by one of the professors here at the university where I'm studying. And essentially what he and his team did was, it has been established long ago that every galaxy in the universe, including our very own Milky Way, resides within what we call dark matter halos. So part of this invisible, astronomers are always referring to dark matter. We know it's there because without it, the physics wouldn't work out. We need to insert this mass for the rotational velocity to be correct. For the fact that, stars don't just fly out into space, you need this dark matter halo. And I'd always heard about dark matter halos, but even to this day, I think it's very mind-blowing. You can imagine that indeed every single galaxy there is a halo of matter that we can't interact with, we cannot see, but we know it's there. And we know it's there because it's theorized that it was more or less the first substance that came into being, right? During the first minutes of the creation of the universe. Now, the reason I mention this is because the distribution of all the galaxies in the universe, and we're talking, we can see anywhere between 200 and 400 billion galaxies. The way that they are scattered around the cosmos, it's not random. In fact, every single galaxy is connected with these strands of gas. You can think of them as tunnels of gas that go from one galaxy to another. And in a way, they sort of support each other. Now, what this research did last year is they said, okay, we call this structure of the universe the cosmic web. So again, the cosmic web just refers to these tunnels of gas that seemingly connect the entire universe, every galaxy that we see. And the cosmic web is called the cosmic web because it more or less resembles a spider web. And the idea was, okay, is this structure random? Because the reason that these tunnels of gas are created the way that they are is due to the configuration of dark matter. So the question is dark matter, did the dark matter assemble in such a way to allow for the most efficient transport network? And what they did is they actually went down to the single-celled organisms, and they found in the rainforest there's this organism who the unofficial name is the slime mold, and this is a single-celled organism that comes together with other slime mold cells to create one overall organism. And in fact, what it does is it scours the bottoms of the rainforest and it searches for food. And when it finds food, it creates these transport networks to get to where the food is going to be. And the reason they were motivated to do this is because prior to this research last year, some scientists, they took the slime mold and they said, okay, seemingly it knows how to create a very efficient network. Why does it know how to create very efficient networks? Well, you can imagine that the slime mold itself is conscious at its own plane. Every action that it takes is a conscious action. So what they did is they took the slime mold and they put it over a map. The first started with the map of, I think it was a map of the Canadian subway system. And sure enough, when they let the slime mold grow, they set the food of the slime mold to be the different towns. And if there is a town that was heavily populated, the food was a lot heavier. And essentially what happened is the slime mold seemingly, it reached all the food, and when it was done creating the network, it mimicked the subway system of Canada. Likewise, they did this on a map of Tokyo. They set the food to be the different cities, and when they let the slime mold grow, when it was done growing, sure enough, the network that it created was actually even more efficient than the subway system of Tokyo. So it's been established that somehow this slime mold, it knows how to create its network to be as efficient as possible. So what they did last year is, well, actually this was, I guess, in 2020, so about 2 years ago, they said, okay, can the slime mold replicate the cosmic web? In other words, was the cosmic web configured the way that it was due to random nature? So what they did is they simulated the way that the slime mold grows. And sure enough, when they set the food of the slime mold to be the galaxies in the universe, when the slime mold was done growing, it recreated the cosmic web. So now, it's very eye-opening because up until now, we have accepted that the reason that the dark matter oriented the way that it did, which allowed for this transport network of gas within the galaxies, and which essentially allowed for the creation of galaxies in the first place, the creation of stars, the creation of planets, including the creation of every organism, was because for whatever reason, the dark matter just happened to configure in the correct manner. And if it hadn't configured in that way, well, then we wouldn't be here. So it doesn't matter. That was the school of thought in the past. But now we can see that, well, actually, yes, there are still a lot of speculation that we think, well, it's more or less random. The dark matter assembled randomly. But if you take a step back and say, well, the force that directed this dark matter, it's the same force that's directing this little single-celled organism to find food. So the authors of this paper, this professor of mine, I had talked to him as soon as I moved here, and I said, where did you draw this inspiration? How could you possibly connect a little single-celled organism to the overall structure of the universe? And he he admitted that he has his reservations. In the paper, he couldn't write the implications that he felt, the spiritual implications that this carried, because, it would go against our scientific norms. But nonetheless, he agreed that it is not random. He's still working on this, but it's clear to us that the force that's driving cosmic evolution, the force that at the very beginning of the existence of this universe created the galaxies, is the same force that's still driving evolution today. Now, what is this force? Well, that's part of this invisible that we don't see. But we know that there are invisible forces, and you can go and look at, say, the development of organisms, the development of a human, the development of an animal. We have this concept of regulation. A lot of people may think that, well, when a fetus is undergoing development, there is a sort of plan. It's going to grow legs, it's going to grow eyes, etc. But a lot of people like to say, well, it's some sort of algorithm, like a computer. It's one step at a time, and once it finishes, you get a human baby. But once it finishes, you get a baby sea urchin, for example. But what happens during the developmental stages is that if you remove some of the cells, the one famous example is they had this little sea urchin in its development stages, and it was a 2-celled organism, and they removed one cell. Well, if it was truly like a computer algorithm, as soon as you remove a component of the computer, for example, well, it should stop working. But that's not what happens. The single cell, even though you removed half of it, it didn't become half a sea urchin. It just became a sea urchin. It developed normally, but it just became half the size. So there's this idea of regulation that, in fact, that when there are, unexpected errors, one could say, during the stages of development, that somehow, the force that's driving development can adapt to it, and it can regulate to it. Another example is you can think of a dog that loses a leg. It's not going to suddenly stop walking. It might take some time, but it's going to learn to adapt to the fact that it has 3 legs, and it's going to go on living its life. It's another example of this concept of regulation. So we have to ask ourselves, if it's truly some sort of mechanistic process that's driving evolution, well, then when these obstacles come in the way, well, then the algorithm should break. But that's not what we see. We see a sort of adaptation. So again, this is very controversial in the community, because we're referring to, these forces that we cannot see. The force that's been driving development, the force that's been driving cosmic evolution, is invisible to our senses. But we know they're there because we can observe the effects. We can observe the fact that you and I are here today. So I wanted to start with this example, this research project, because I think that the way that we're going to move forward in science is to open up our interpretations. The scientific method has been adopted and it works well. I don't think there's a reason to change the scientific method. It's giving us, the results that we're after, but the interpretation can be very, very difficult. And I think the way to interpret in a more open manner is to accept the fact, that there is a wisdom to the universe. There are indeed these invisible forces. You don't have to go too far. You can think of magnetism, for example. We've accepted magnetism because we know its effects. We know the equations that drive magnetic attraction and magnetic repulsion, but we cannot see it. If you have this light on, there's these electric fields, these magnetic fields that I cannot see. Just because I cannot see them doesn't mean they're not there. Likewise, even for a magnet, you have a magnet and you cut it in half, the magnetic fields reorient. So now you have 2 magnets. The magnet doesn't stop working. It just becomes 2. Likewise, you can cut these 2 in half and same thing will happen. It's this concept of regulation. There is some sort of intelligent, you could say, think of an intelligent design that's kind of working in the background, but it's not one step at a time, because you can imagine if that were the case, to say that, the way that we develop, the way that the cosmos develop, the way that you and I developed as human beings, well, we grew our legs and we grew our nose and we grew our ears because the right material was present at just the right time. That's currently what's accepted today. We know that there are stages of development, and they occur because we think maybe there's something in the cell that tells them, okay, it's time to grow an arm, it's time to grow some fingers. But we know that that's not the case, because we've been able to, we take these proteins in the lab outside of the cell, and sure enough, if you put it under the right conditions, it's going to continue on with normal development. So there's nothing intrinsic to the cells that's telling, how it's telling the organism how to develop. Again, it's something that's more mysterious than that. And I refer to these as invisible forces because, sure enough, no one knows what they are. One name that has been given to these forces that drive development here at for organisms are these morphic fields. We're told that all creation is just a bunch of fields. You can think of gravity, for example. Everybody accepts gravity because we know we're stuck on this earth. We go around the sun, the moon goes around the earth, but the gravity to us is an invisible field. We cannot see it. We believe that maybe there is a particle, call it the graviton. Everybody's looking for it. Nobody has found it. Is it possible that we'll find it? I think eventually we'll come to understand it in a more intimate level. But right now it is a theory because even though gravity, we understand it so well, we don't actually know what the source is. We don't know what force has been driving it. But if we go back to the example that I gave, well, what force drove the development of the cosmic web? When the universe was created, is it just random that everything just aligned perfectly? Every step along the way was just perfect, such that the dark matter could orient itself correctly to allow for the growth of galaxies, to allow for stellar evolution to take place, which ultimately resulted in the creation of planets, the creation of worlds like the one that we live in. Again, it's very controversial to go into metaphysics currently because we refer to these invisible fields, and that's about as far as we can go. If they're invisible, it's because we can't interact with them. It doesn't mean that they're not present, of course. And one question is, well, how can we interact with them? I think the way that we are ultimately going to be able to understand these more intimately is to open up our interpretations and accept the fact that maybe we get some sort of scientific result, and instead of trying to stick solely to scientific interpretations, which ultimately will get us to a sort of hard wall, we leave it open-minded. And one great example that I have here is the work that Richard Tarnas published, Cosmos and Psyche, which I had read just less than 2 years ago. Now, as an astronomer, I've always thought that astrology was very silly. I thought there's no way that the planets somehow influence our developments. Now that I've come to study what's truly invisible and what these invisible fields mean and how they interact and what the role is in the universe. Well, Richard Tarnas, what he did was he said, well, he took a very scientific standpoint and he said, I'm just going to study the history of the world. And he found that indeed there are certain big social changes that occur during a certain planetary transit. I think the transit that he studied was that of Neptune and Pluto. But he said when this transit occurs every so-and-so years, there's a big social change, he found the Reformation, for example. He found the French Revolution, the Industrial Revolution. And ultimately, at the end, he says that this is a coincidence. But he coined a particular term, some sort of significant coincidence. So his interpretation was very open-minded. He said that indeed, he's not going to say that this particular transit influences our behavior, because ultimately we do have free will. But I think he was kind of pointing to the fact that the cosmic energies, these invisible fields that we can interact with, but they're present there, they open up opportunities and impediments in our individual lives at an individual level, but also for your family, also for your community, also for your nation, also for the world. So again, this is not a work that I would share with my colleagues, because they will just start showing me horoscopes and think that, and I'm really into reading fortune cookies, for example. But I think that is the way the science is going to move forward. But having these liberal interpretations to the science, to the results that come out of it. Now, ultimately, we can think of the universe as a giant organism. As I mentioned, the slime mold, you start with single cell organisms that come together to form an overall organism, which together can find the food that it needs to survive. Likewise, you can think that we ourselves are a part of the universe. We know this, but do we understand how integral of a part we are? In other words, I like to think of like the entire universal system as sort of gears. You could think of galaxies are a bigger gear. The stars are smaller gears. Planets are even smaller gears. But we ourselves, we could think of ourselves as the smallest of gears. But nonetheless, if this small gear stops working, the whole thing stops working. So ultimately, I think we're all at the same level in the sense that, I think of this analogy with different size gears, just to, I think ultimately a lot of people think of ourselves in a very minuscule way. We think maybe our life here on earth doesn't matter. What in the grand scale of things, why do I have to worry about, how my time on earth affected others, how I contributed, if ultimately you think, well, the cosmos are so great, billions of stars within our galaxy and billions of galaxies that we can see in the observable universe, surely, my presence here actually has no implications in the long term. But you would be wrong, because again, the reason that the universe was able to develop the way that it did was because part of that plan was the creation of these planets that we live in, was the creation of these organisms. So for us to discard life, for example, would be to, discard the overall creation. And that I think nobody can ever do. So I especially like that quote from Einstein that said that a lot of us, even if you don't think of yourself in such a minuscule manner and think that your presence here is meaningless, it is true that all of us have very close, very intimate affection toward a very small group of people, whether that be your mom, your parents, your siblings, close friends, close coworkers. But how are we ever going to understand our presence, why we're here, or understand overall cosmic evolution, if we don't understand our presence here on Earth today? Which is why Einstein was advocating for the growth of compassion toward others. He believes that the way for us to go to the next level is to understand that indeed nothing is insignificant. That yes, there are strangers that you see on the streets, but every stranger that you see is capable of being loved. Every stranger, has friends, they have family that loves them. It just so happens that your time on earth today didn't put you in close connection with that person. Otherwise, if I could imagine, if I grew up with everyone in this meeting, I would have a different type of love, the type of love, that I'm striving for, that type of love that St. Paul talked about, the love that's not selfish, the love that seeks to seeks the true betterment of someone else. So if we could ever get there, and I think that's part of the journey, as Einstein was saying, I think it would open us up not only, on a spiritual level, but also on a scientific level. Because I think one challenge that we have, that the scientific community in particular has, is that we don't realize that we ourselves are part of the equation. And we just started to see that with quantum mechanics. We realized when we make our measurements, we actually affect the measurement. When we take a measurement, we're telling this particle, we're saying, okay, I'm taking the measurements. You need to start being a particle now, instead of it being a wave that says, okay, this guy's taking the measurements, so now I'm going to materialize and I'm going to show up here. So scientists, once they realize that they're a part of the equation, I think will be open to, a more liberal interpretations that today would make a lot of scientists very uneasy. And I think the goal is, how can we do that? I think the first step is to realize, to realize that we should try to love everyone. Can we feel compassion toward everyone? And can we feel, truly love someone like you would love a family member? I think if I were ever to get there, then I think I would definitely open the avenue for a lot of scientific developments.
You're an amazing scientist. We are so fortunate to have you, Daniel. I don't think I've ever heard a scientific presentation and in the way that you have brought it around to pointing to, the teachings of Christ. That's quite remarkable. I'm so thankful for you doing that. I'm actually reminded when you talk about each of us having this importance that we might not realize, of that Christmas classic that maybe some of us watched over this last Christmas season, It's a Wonderful Life. And in it, Jimmy Stewart is just such a man of such solid golden heart. And yet he comes to a place of great despair and feels as if he needs to end his life. And an angel appears. And he doesn't look anything like an angel. And he takes this man through the experience when he says he wishes he had never been born. He takes him through the experience of going through his life as if he had never been born. And all the things that should have happened, all the good things that should have happened, that he actually had accomplished so far in his lifetime, had not happened. And his small town was in such a worse condition than it would have, than it actually was in, because he had been born. So that importance of our connections with everybody else was, you've really, I mean, by pointing to dark matter and, you know, the interconnections of the tunnels of gas, and analogizing that to single cell slime mold and the cosmic web. It's you're just giving us really a fantastic exercise for, I think, not just the mind, but the heart and the soul. Anyone who would like to make a point in response or offer a question? This is the time that, oh, Roger has his hand raised.
Hi. Daniel, thank you so much. Thank you for telling me so many things that are completely incomprehensible. You know, I'm looking back on science from what, 1500s, you know, when the scientists basically became our religion, and science was like a measure. And we've gone through the 20th century with science and religion as being separate, because they learned so much that the church didn't believe in. But towards the end of the 20th century, actually, by the time you got to Einstein, we began to see that the ancient truths were actually measurable in quantum physics, that we are all connected. And to me, it was the beginning of the connection of science and religion that you're now talking about. And what I've seen is we put together all the ancient traditions have been telling us for years that we're all connected to each other. But now science has proven that that is the case. And so now we believe it because science is our religion. But the good thing is, so many people will have to believe it because it's all true. And eventually these complicated dark matters you're talking about are going to become understandable too. And we're going to see how things evolve. And it's almost like we're babies, but we're doing a couple of things as human evolution. Number one, we're proving things in our own new scientific testing manners with our technology and our knowledge that are proving things that people couldn't prove that way before, but intuited or understood over centuries of knowledge. So it seems to me at the beginning now, say Einstein's theory, 1935, or you know, even later, we kind of have maybe 100 years now, where the old science was maybe 500 years before we got to this point where science and religion began to mesh. So I'm just so happy at your age, there are people like yourself, maybe you're the only one, I don't know, but there are people like yourself who are at the cusp of this, but we may have another 200-300 years before we get to the details that we understand what that dark matter is and what the connection is, and how do things evolve when they're cut in half, but they turn out to still recreate themselves. So when you get into astrology, that may be an easy area because there's so much about it that has been taken in the, quote, superstitious, mystical kind of realm. But now science may very well bring that in. I mean, look at the fact that the moon affects the waters, the tide every night. And when the moon is high, you know, full, people go crazy. Well, if the moon can have that impact, why can't the other planets have that impact? And who knows what they are? And maybe each one of them has a different position or a turn or something. So I'm very fascinated by the fact that you've taken it to a level beyond what I've been thinking about, just our connectedness and what's proven, but how much more we'll actually know about where we are in the next, if we keep analyzing these things, and the fact that we've got 200 to 400 billion galaxies. One other thing I'd like to say, to your other point, Anita Moorjani had a near-death experience in 2011, wrote a book about her experience. She could have gone on, but she was told, come back if you want to. So she came back, and I wondered, why did she come back? And what I hit upon was being alive as opposed to being an energy piece. You have feelings, you have a human body, which is capable of changing the energy. So you talk about the importance of being a human being, and we have things like if a butterfly flaps its wings in Malaysia, what happens in New York? So I think there's an enormous amount to learn by that. And I think being alive gives us a possibility. If there's 8 billion people on Earth and there's 100 zillion, atoms floating around, or souls, or whatever you want to call them, we have not only enormous opportunity, but kuleana in our short life here to do our best to further the evolution and to bring that love in, which obviously is the ultimate goal.
I think you're right on, Roger. In fact, it was in the 18th century that when they were teaching physics at a college level, even to PhD students, they said, well, really, if you're going into physics, there's nothing new for you to learn. Then there's nothing new for you to discover. Everything has been discovered. It was only at the turn, when quantum mechanics came around, that there was this revolution that people realized that, in fact, not only is there new physics, it's more mysterious than we could have ever imagined. And the current theory is a probabilistic theory. You want to find this little particle, well, 20% chance is here, 30% chance is there, etc. Einstein himself, he said that he doesn't believe that such randomness is true. I think his famous quote was, that he doesn't believe that God placed dice. And something I've come to accept is, indeed, nothing in our lives is random. As I was mentioning, one school of thought around the creation of the cosmos is that, well, it was random, and we just so happened to, we rode the snake eyes, and the dark matter just came about the right way, and then it allowed for the creation of galaxies. If it wasn't just in that particular manner, no galaxies, no stars, no humans. So again, it's a truly random. Again, I don't believe that nothing is random, and that's kind of what Einstein was getting at, is there is a mystery that we don't understand. And we just recently found out that, we believe that the fastest thing that can travels at the speed of light. Yet somehow two individual particles, in principle, in opposite sides of the universe, if they're entangled, we call this quantum entanglements, they can communicate instantly. So how is it that this communication can happen if, it will take light 13 billion years to get from one particle to another? So again, it's breaking our current understanding of physics. So I agree with you, Roger, that there was, a lot of dogmatism within the community, but it wasn't until quantum mechanics, came about that I think a lot of scientists really opened up to the possibilities that not only do we not understand everything, but there is, again, a wisdom that we are currently failing to grasp. And I think you were right, Roger, that ultimately you have to merge a level of spirituality with these scientific findings, because it's going to allow you to make the appropriate interpretations. With that said, as I started my talk, I said that I believe the scientific method should stick around. It works because, we're intellectual beings. We need an intellectual process. You can't just bring in spirituality out of the blue. I think it has to be the final step. You use the scientific method, and then when you get your results, you try to interpret it in a way that allows you to make these giant leaps, as one may say. So for me now, as I'm working on my PhD, as much as I would like to, go in and try to find the connections between these cosmic energies in our lives, I realized that I should get a solid foundation in the scientific method, so that ultimately, in 5-6 years, when I'm a proven scientist, I can go off on my own and I can, through meditation, be able to, get deeper to what the true interpretation should be.
Kirk, can I call on you?
Thanks, Daniel, for taking us on that journey. Yeah, it was a very eye-opening, mind-opening. And I've got so many questions, so I've been, while listening, trying to narrow it down to one or two here. But, I was starting with this, as you started your discussion with the idea of dark energy and dark matter. And apparently, depending upon who you talk to and the mathematics associated with it, that only somewhere between 5 and 15% of the cosmos, the total cosmos, quote unquote, is visible to us and accessible by the instruments that we have. So it's somewhere between 85 and 95% of the cosmos is dark energy and dark matter. And one physicist said, we may as well call them Tom and Jerry, because we have no idea as to their nature or their constitution. All we know is that the mathematics point to the fact that they exist. They're there, right? And also in relation to the expansion of the universe, everything's moving away from everything else and accelerating as it moves away. So you have to accommodate for those facts. And that's how the postulation of what's called dark energy and dark matter emerged. But we also know that that certain great physicists like Max Planck, one of the founders of quantum theory, postulated that some portion of what we would call dark energy or dark matter would be what would ultimately be constituted of what we call consciousness, and that is operating at more subtle levels of matter, as you suggested about the dark, the halo, each galaxy having a halo. And then there's also this idea that consciousness is primary to what we witness as visible manifestation, and that's also, that idea is emerging in other fields as well, psychology particularly, but that and then there's also this what used to be called the anthropic principle, that the manifestation of the cosmos, we have to include the fact that consciousness has arisen, right, through a nature, through the manifestation of the cosmos. Conscious beings have arisen. We know that because we are conscious beings. And so that there's something about this great cosmic field that is producing these individual centers of consciousness. So I'm just wondering if you could comment on that, about number one, that the idea that you spoke of it as wisdom, but are you familiar with other scientists, maybe like Roger Penrose and of course Rupert Sheldrake, who is sort of on the fringe, has sort of been ostracized really by the scientific community, but other scientists who believe that or hold that principle that it's possible that consciousness was primary to what we think of as a visible cosmos, and then also that is contributing to this what you might think of as one of the end results is conscious beings, self-conscious beings who have choice, who have free will, and so on.
Yeah, so the one conclusion that I didn't want to make, but have made myself, and the reason I started with this idea of sharing the fact that the cosmic web can be replicated by a mere slime mold was, well, we know that the slime mold, we can accept, at least I can, that the slime mold is acting because of consciousness. It knows how to find the food in the most efficient manner because it is conscious at its own level. But a lot of people would, they might go that far, but they won't go as far as saying that matter is conscious, I won't go as far as saying even dark matter is conscious, but the conclusion that I wanted to get at was, well, the fact that we can replicate the cosmic web with this animal is an implication that it kind of implies that the force that drove cosmic evolution, that drove this dark matter to not only come about the way that it did, but orient itself to allow for galaxy formation was due to consciousness. Now I've pondered this, what is consciousness? Well, at a basic level, you can think that it's the ability to react to your environment. One example that I always like to think of is, I believe the particles themselves are conscious because we have the creation of elements. You can think of water, for example, H2O. How is it that these individual components can come together to make water? It's because they know how to interact with their environment. This hydrogen comes together with the oxygen and we get water, but it's not going to come together with a bunch of carbon atoms, for example. So why is it that it only likes to go, with oxygen? Why do certain elements, require certain compositions? Because they are conscious of their own plane of perception. Likewise, we go even greater, and I can accept the fact that cosmic evolution is being driven by consciousness at its own level. Now, consciousness, again, I've part of this before. You can think of the creation of the universe. For us to be here today on the Zoom meeting, for us to be conscious here, well, this consciousness, the potential for the consciousness had to be present at the creation of the universe. Otherwise, if there's no potential, then there's no way we could be conscious today. So, where does that get us? I don't know, but I do think that, everything is being driven by consciousness, and that consciousness was present at the beginning. And the potential, as you said, any individual concentrations of consciousness results in us, each of us in this meeting today. But ultimately, we're I think of the teachers of the East who, are always saying that everything is connected. I've thought about, what does this mean? How can it be that everything originates from the same source? Okay, we share the same source as the planets. We share the same source as the galaxies and this dark matter. It's the reason that cosmic energies, for lack of a better term, influence our consciousness here. Because if everything is connected, then everything can influence everything. But again, what does it mean that everything is connected? I can imagine if one truly had this perception, how beautiful would it be, to truly be alive every day, to be with your brethren, and to feel connected not only to human beings, but to plants. We know plants react to their environment. We know they're conscious. To feel connected with animals, to feel connected with the moon and the planets. I think it would be, I guess some people would refer to this as maybe enlightenment. Yes, but I don't really know how to answer the question, Kirk, besides the fact that I do think that the reason that we're alive here today is because, I had mentioned maybe some sort of, intelligent design, but to me, it's because, from the very beginning, everything that has been driving cosmic evolution down to our level was because of consciousness. It was conscious action that oriented, the universe the way that it is. It's conscious action, that got us here today, and it's conscious action that we take every day, that takes us farther in this evolution that we're in. Thank
you. I'm going to call on Carol next. Carol.
Daniel, you're not alone. There's other people like you, i.e. me. So I'm a retired nurse that specialized in open cardiac cath and open heart surgery. I suffer from post-traumatic stress disorder because I died twice. And in previous dialogues that I have had in various groups with Renee, I know that I've told David this, but in that death experience, I don't remember feeling things when I was dead. Like, you live your whole life and it's like watching it, and it's really great and warm, but I don't remember the way food tasted. I don't remember when I came back to my physical body, my senses is what made me want to stay. That I could taste things, that I could love and feel love, that I could, the unexplainable, the ethereal stuff that we don't really have a way to tie a word to. One of the people I admire most is Carl Sagan. And you probably know who Carl Sagan was. There was a remake of his show Cosmos, and they used to show it on PBS. You're probably way too young to remember the show, but it was there. And Disney did a remake on it. And in part of their remake, there's an episode about Einstein writing a letter to President Roosevelt about uranium and him attempting to stop the progression of uranium being developed to have that chain reaction and make a nuclear bomb. They denied his clearance to the Manhattan Project, citing that he was too passionate and too compassionate. And he said later in letters that if he had been allowed access, that his goal would have been to have not had the atomic bomb progress to when it was actually detonated twice. He predicted all of those things by just having the knowledge that that science was possible and that it could harm potentially the entire world, ending mankind as we knew it. And his vision of taking that science and seeing it progress is exactly what happened over those 15 years that he developed that theory. As a scientist myself, the scientific method is probably the foundation to medicine. We go back to it time and time again. In anything that we do, there's a standard and a protocol and a procedure. And we like when things work the way they're supposed to, and there's a cycle and a sequence to things. But there's still so much we don't know. We don't know why babies grow ears at certain times, or we do know that body parts originate from certain lineations within a cell, but we don't know why they specialize or why we can take cells and they know how to continue to beat like the heart does. We don't know what gives cardiac muscle electrical impulse, but we know it's there. So I'm very fascinated by the invisible world around us, and I really appreciate you taking time to come and join our group today. So much appreciated.
Thank you for sharing, Carl.
Donna, may I call on you?
With what Daniel mentioned about the love that expressed by St. Paul, this this love of the whole, and also the fact that you mentioned meditation almost as though it was a tool, a scientific tool. When I think of meditation, I think of trying to understand like a universe of love, a universe of gratitude. How did the idea of meditation that you mentioned connect with that kind of an idea of meditation?
Yeah, thanks, Donna. It's good to see you. I'm currently in my current state. I think of meditation as a way for me to expand my mind to escape materialistic desires. And I think materialism is something that is very, very challenging and actually very troublesome when one is pursuing science, because we use this viewpoint to discover new and use it to write his 3 laws of motion. It took us up until quantum mechanics, but ultimately I think to think of materialism as, okay, everything that I see is the only reality, that's a big problem. And I think for me, the only way that I could expand my mind and try to escape this dogmatism is by meditation, because even though I myself don't meditate as frequently as I would like to, I would hope that at some point I began to feel the connectedness, that the interactions that I had with people, for example, on a daily basis. If I could meditate every day, I would imagine just how powerful those interactions would be to me, especially how meaningful they would be, even more so than they are today. And this would allow me ultimately, I think naturally it's going to lead to only more compassion, but to this truer form of love. Because I was talking to, I was sharing this with Maurice actually last week. I'd asked him, how is it possible for one to love yet detach themselves at the same time? And this is where, you know, this idea of, you know, the love of St. Paul came about, that, well, when you truly love, say, an individual, you love them and you want what's best for them. Every action that you take is for the pursuit of the betterment of this individual. Imagine if you love, you know, every being in this manner, every action that you take would be for the betterment of this being, of every being. So I think naturally, ultimately, you know, how I asked, you know, is, have I ever experienced this type of true love? I think, as Marie said, is, you know, it's one step at a time. You know, as long as we acknowledge it at first, you know, that is the very first step. Now, as far as, you know, how it connects, you know, to science, well, I think, as I mentioned, one major dogma that we have is this materialistic standpoint, that everything we see and everything we can measure is the only reality. But as I had mentioned in my talk, well, we know that, you know, we can see the effects of the invisible matter, the effects of this invisible fields, and we don't even have to go, you know, to way outward. I mentioned gravity. Gravity is only present because of an invisible field. You know, the stars are the way that they are because of gravity. Yeah, we don't know anything about gravity, but we've come to accept it as a good theory because it's such an integral part of our livelihoods. You know, we don't just start floating off into the sky. But yeah, if you talk about, you know, these cosmic energies, the fields that they contribute and how they affect our consciousness, well, since, you know, it's not as prevalent as gravity, a lot of people will discard it right away and say, I can't see it. And even if they're not completely conscious of it, they are, you know, these thoughts are coming from a materialistic framework. So at least to answer your question, Donna, at least for me, for meditation is a tool that I could use in this initial stages of, you know, spiritual development to escape materialism and be able to expand my mind and, you know, really escape it in a meaningful and intimate manner.
Roger mentioned ancient cultures and how science is coming to see the reality of things like the interconnectedness of all of life and stuff that ancients have been thinking about for a long time. And I was thinking about I was thinking when you originally were speaking about what it would be like to imagine a universe that loves. And if you think about certain like Native American groups and other indigenous people that call the earth mother, and they think about it in every act they take, it's definitely got to be an antidote to these coarser ways of looking at reality. Thanks, Daniel.
Gosh, Donna, that's just such a remarkable phrase, a universe that loves. How can we imagine a universe that loves? And then to know that there are peoples on this earth that not only could, but actually do imagine and live as if the universe loves.
Yeah, yeah, it's just
Quite remarkable. Thank you.
It is.
David, we're coming to the top of the hour. I guess you're going to be our final speaker.
I'm having a hard time imagining a universe that doesn't love. I mean, it wouldn't be here if it wasn't. But my question for Daniel was, don't you think that the laws of physics themselves and that principle that we're calling life, do you think that it is itself evolving? Like, I don't think it was all there in the beginning.
That's a good question, David. It reminds me of, you know, the 100-year-old question: are we inventing mathematics or are we discovering mathematics? In other words, was this always there? If so, you know, can we invent better mathematics, a better way to do multiplication, a better way to take a square root, a better way to integrate, for example? I think, David, I once heard that life is motion. All life is motion, and motion is change. You can think that, yes, we know we orbit the sun, but I think very seldomly do we ever picture our position within our galaxy. You can imagine we orbit the sun that at the same time is orbiting this black hole at the center of a galaxy, there's so much movement going on. Is it possible that, in millions of years, we're going to cross a different space, maybe different fields, different dark energies that could change the laws of nature as we understand them today? I think, David, the answer is yes. I think that the reason we have the world that we have today is because of our current position, not only within the galaxy, but within the overall cosmic scale. So again, is it possible that in billions of years, as we continue to move, if motion is change, then yes, I believe that that the laws, as we understand the laws of physics, the scientific principles, they are ultimately going to evolve. But is it possible that there's a star right behind us that's going to go into the space that we're in today? So I wouldn't call it so much of an evolution, as I think that there are regions in the cosmos that have laws for whatever reason. And then as we continue, yes, we may see it as an evolution, but I think we're just experiencing more and more. So yeah, that's a good question, David. It's
and yet, Daniel, I believe that you already addressed it from the standpoint of, if there was not the possibility of wisdom, of intelligence, of love in the cosmos, if there was not that potential to begin with, it could never happen. This evolution could be seen as something that we are moving toward, and yet that always exists in potentia.
Yes, which is why I believe ultimately every planet, every star is going to get there. Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Or like an unfoldment rather than something that's emerging that wasn't there before, right?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
It's like a plant unfolding new aspects of itself.
Mm.
Or maybe a combination of the unfolding and the actions we take as it unfolds having some impact on that.
Oh, yes. Yes, we're part of it.
We're part of it.
We're
And
part
that's
of it.
like free will. And, are we set in a pattern from when we are born and where we're headed? And so to a certain extent we are, but it's, maybe like the stars too in the horoscope, there's a potential, but then whatever we do, how we deal with it really makes it come to fruition.
Mary, I'm seeing a big smile. What would you think about giving a vote of thanks to Daniel? Do you feel up to that right now?
Absolutely. Mahalo, Daniel. And Happy New Year. Thank you for helping us get into this new year. I will take away from this session how positive our possibilities are and how much love we do have for each person in our small circle as we expand outward, and to just keep up the faith.
So thank you all so much.